The secret of Egyptian priests. Atlantis and gods who could fly to and from other planets. Welcome to my presentation on the exciting topic of Atlantis, the forgotten prehistory of humanity, and the ancient gods who have come from the stars and ruled the earth. In the presentation, we will explore the main historical source on Atlantis from the writings of the famous philosopher Plato. We will not make assumptions, the way the mainstream historians do, that the story is fictional, because there are countless ancient accounts telling us that indeed, there was a series of worldwide cataclysms which wiped out entire advanced civilizations. What remains today are mostly stone structures. They usually are much older than mainstream science has assumed. We will learn that indeed, our modern science is a mix of wrong assumptions, based on the modern arrogance of thinking that today we are the only sophisticated and technologically advanced civilization that has ever been on the planet. Bear with me until the end, because it is going to be an exciting exploration, particularly in this timing, when much information is being controlled, censored, and kept hidden from people. It is often done in order to maintain the old oppressive religious, economic and social systems of control. Knowing our true history is the first step to the liberation from the oppression. Atlantis was first introduced to world literature by the Greek philosopher Plato in dialogues he wrote in the city-state of Athens in the 4th century before the Common Era. The story of Atlantis, as well as the emphasized idea that there have been many advanced civilizations which had been forgotten because of frequent world cataclysms, came from a relative of Plato's who remembered stories passed down from Solon, his ancestor. Solon himself heard them from priests he had met while visiting Egypt. The priests told Solon how the ancient Athenians defeated an invasion of Europe by the greatest power then known, coming from the island empire of Atlantis, from beyond today's northwest Africa. This is not the only account of the Egyptian priests having access to thousands of years of prehistory. Herodotus, in his histories, also confirms similar accounts from his travels to Egypt. The mainstream historians have assumed that Atlantis was a fiction that Plato used to illustrate his philosophical ideas. However, it has to be mentioned that plenty of similar assumptions have been made by historians about other ancient accounts, which later turned out to be true. For example, the story of Troy and how Troy was believed to be a literary fiction. Yet, later Troy, with its 4,000 years of history, became one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. The first excavations were undertaken by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in 1870. Before the discovery, the mainstream historians simply dismissed Troy as a historic location. Many similar misconceptions are being still taught in schools. For example, the age and purpose of the Egyptian pyramids are still erroneously taught as built by Khufu as a tomb and to be about 4,600 years old. The same outdated teachings concern many other pyramids and so-called temples across the globe. These ideas will be explored in another presentation. Subscribe to the channel to be the first to be notified about new exciting presentations. What is the reason for such a massive overlooking of our past? At this stage, it seems obvious that our current modern civilization is a continuation of an ancient development that survived horrible cataclysmic events in the past. These events are described in detail in many ancient stories on every continent. They simply cannot be considered to be legends any longer. How would people from different continents communicated in the times where there was not supposed to be any intercontinental interaction? Additionally, there are many more scientific discoveries confirming some untold cataclysms which happened throughout the last 80,000 years, leading to the last ice age extinction. According to the Egyptian priests, we are a post-Diluvian civilization of survivors who have forgotten their past history. This assertion was made around 3,000 years ago. Plato in his dialogues explains how entire civilizations can be forgotten and how so little past civilization evidence is left. Today, there is a growing number of scientists who begin realizing that our 19th century Western archaeological interpretations of the past are completely wrong, Eurocentric, colonial, imperialist assumptions concerning our past. It is similar to the 16th century Europeans invading America with a notion that they bring the only advanced civilization to the primitive cultures. Yet, the cultures invaded in America were in many ways much more sophisticated than the invaders. The same applies to the colonial domination of Africa. Advancement cannot be measured by one's aggression and the military power. In fact, in the story of Atlantis, this is the very reason given why the Atlanteans were punished by the gods. Why our education still chooses to teach outdated theories which cannot be any longer sustained. Why the history is still written by the aggressors. The answer is complex, and it includes human arrogance, manipulation, unwillingness to recognize new data, often contrary to the scientists' lifelong research. There is also a fear of deconstructing the old power systems of religion, greed-motivated economy, and medieval totalitarian politics, hiding behind the long-lost democracy. Imagine how upset some people would feel if they discovered that the gods they pray to were not gods at all, but humanoid beings who came here from another planet, or just people, like you and I, who developed and mastered powerful technologies. From the Plato's description of the gods, we learn that they lived much longer than regular humans. They had an advanced agricultural and architectonic knowledge. They were able to fly in their winged chariots, not only between the continents but in the outer space as well. They obviously were made of flesh, since they often procreated with human women, creating very gifted offspring, often known as the heroes of old. More and more various archaeological sites are being unearthed across the globe. New findings point out to our long-forgotten, yet sophisticated past, that is stranger than fiction. A wise man has said that our true history is more like a fairy tale because we have been for too long in the mentality of survival, and we lost connection to our magic. The good news is that the magic is now returning through our science and self-awareness. Remembering our past is crucial to progress our civilization without rolling back into tyranny and ignorance. On one hand, we have the technology to create what just 100 years ago would be called a witchcraft. On the other hand, our collective and individual consciousness expands dramatically, and we increasingly become aware of our hidden abilities, which in the past were only assigned to the gods and heroes of old. One of the main, recurring themes, not only in Plato's writings, but also in the history teaching from all around the world, is the idea that humanity has forgotten about its origins after a great cataclysm that occurred in the distant past. In fact, the Great Cataclysm appears to be a series of events, over a longer period of time, which annihilated any developed culture and high civilizations of the past. Plato writes, great and marvelous actions of the Athenian city, which have passed into oblivion through lapse of time, and the destruction of mankind, and one in particular greater than all. The tale that was brought from Egypt states that, through the lapse of time, and the destruction of the actors, it has not come down to us. We see Egypt as one of the oldest civilizations, but our dating is inadequate. We ignore the age of the Indian cultures, which thrived before there was anything of significance in Europe. And we do not realize that what we consider the ancient Egypt is more of the end of a long story, rather than a beginning of a new advanced civilization that appeared out of nowhere. The ancient stories, which did not come down to us because of the series of cataclysms, which included earthquakes, fire coming from the heavens, meteor impacts, excessive and prolonged rainfall, massive floods, tsunamis, darkened sky for years, sudden freeze and famine after the events, which forced the survivors to eat human flesh in order to survive. These themes return over and over again through ancient stories we dismiss as fantastic legends. In fact, many ancient stories are horrifying and heartbreaking. The End of Atlantis, that was triggered by a long series of cataclysmic events, has been remembered over the millennia as the most horrifying story of human loss ever remembered. The ancient name of Africa meant the land where many died in the cataclysm. The memory of the annihilation that touched the entire world has been treasured in the Halloween remembrance, marking the eve of the destruction. It has also been adopted in the religious feast of the departed, or All Souls' Day, on the 31st of November. This is also the time where annual meteor showers can be observed. These are the same cosmic debris which contributed to the Great Flood thousands of years ago. They are still falling on the planet. Let us look at what Plato says about the series of cataclysms which ended Atlantis, alongside other pre-Diluvian civilizations of Europe and Asia. There have been, and will be again, many destructions of mankind, arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. The gods treated the earth with a deluge of water. The survivors in your country, Greece, are the herdsmen and shepherds who dwelled on the mountains, but those who, like you, live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. The same idea of the god of gods sending the flood as a punishment is well known in the Jewish writings, known in the West as the Old Testament. Were the gods displeased with their human experiment and decided to wipe the humanity out and begin something new? There is also mentioning about mass extinctions by winter freeze and summer Sunday. So, by extreme cold and heat. The fact is that wherever the extremity of winter frost or of summer sun does not prevent, mankind exist, sometimes in greater, sometimes in lesser numbers. The survivors were often shepherds and people in the countryside, since most of large cities were located on the coasts, and those were destroyed by numerous cataclysms. After each cataclysm, the society has to rebuild, usually remembering less and less, and having less skills. So, you have to begin all over again like children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, writes Plato. The Egyptian priests say, in the first place you remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones. Your whole city are descended from a small seed or remnant of those who survived. This is told about the ancient Greece. Because for many generations, the survivors of that destruction died, leaving no written word. According to the Egyptian priests, who had the records of the ancient history in their temple archives, unlike the ancient Greeks, who had lost the records about their own origin, many have wrongly speculated that Atlantis must be located immediately after the passage between today's Spain and Morocco. However, beyond the pillars does not imply an immediate vicinity. When we look at the map, we can see that the straight line from the pillars towards the west takes us to the region of Cuba and the Bahamas, where the main island was situated. Beside that, the Atlantean Empire was spread over the whole region, with outposts as far as Egypt, if not farther. So, Atlantis is both the capital city, as well as the name of the entire dominion. The power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together. The reference here is to the North and Central American region, and what are today the Caribbean islands, starting from the tip of Florida. Afterwards, that occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all sunk into the earth, and the island of Atlantis disappeared in the depths of the sea. Considering other of my sources, it can be deducted that it was the final destruction of Atlantis that had spread over a longer period of time. Plato talks about the sunk island of Atlantis that became an impossible barrier of mud, hard to sail through. It resonates with sailor stories about difficult sails through the Sargasso Sea, which is a part of the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of Cuba and the Bahamas, which have also been reported by many researchers to contain underwater ruins of stone cities, including underwater pyramids. Then Plato continues with the story saying, in the days of old, the gods had the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. The gods were the ones who came from the stars, flying on the winged chariots. Some of the chariots were round, like those of the Anunnaki, and they had wings coming out for landing. Nowadays, to a modern man, it sounds like technology rather than a magic chariot. Plato describes that invasion of Atlantans and the following cataclysm ending both Greek and Atlantean civilizations have taken place 9,000 years before his time. He explains how the cataclysm completely changed the landscape of the earth, washing away the rich soil with the vegetation that covered the mountains. Since the time of which I am speaking, and during all this time, and through so many changes, that has never been any considerable accumulation of the soil coming down from the mountains, as in other places, but the earth has fallen away, all around and sunk out of sight. The consequence is, that in comparison of what then was, the remaining only the bones of the wasted body, as they may be called, as in the case of small islands, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and a mere skeleton of the land being left. Plato explains how all the ancient civilizations disappeared, because they were several times simply washed into the ocean, the whole soil what was left, and the landscape change, from lush and numerous forests, into a bare washed away rocks. Plato also makes us aware that the Acropolis and the Greek temples, on the hill, in the ancient times, were surrounded by lush vegetation, but in a single night of excessive rain, washed away the soil and laid bare the rock. At the same time there were earthquakes, and then occurred the extraordinary inundation. Then Plato continues about the ancient inhabitants of the land, calling them gods, who were human-like, but they were more powerful and lived longer. They made for themselves temples, and instituted sacrifices. Poseidon received for his plot the island of Atlantis. He had children and settled in a part of the island, which I will describe. So, what do we know about the gods? The gods lived all around the globe, on different continents. They distributed the earth among themselves. Everyone has their own area. They had sex with human women, and created so-called powerful heroes, half-human half-gods. Their bloodlines were filled with people with certain abilities, being more conscious and aware of being able to manipulate different energies. The island of Atlantis was described as follows: the island looking towards the sea, but in the center of the whole island, there was a plain which is said to have been the fairest of all plains and very fertile. Poseidon was considered to be a god, simply because he had powerful abilities and technology to convert the island into extremely efficient agricultural production place. Poseidon, being a god, found no difficulty in making special arrangements for the center island, bringing up 2 springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water and the other of cold, and making every variety of food to spring up abundantly from the soil. The eldest of Poseidon's children was called Atlas, and he was the first king, and after him the whole island and the ocean are called Atlantic. This is the origin of the name Atlantic and Atlantis. Poseidon also was somehow able to create a perhaps artificial light that provided abundance in his agricultural enterprises. They, gods, went on constructing the temples and palaces and harbors and docks. They made a road to and from the royal palace. They built the palace in the habitation of the god and of the ancestors, until they made the building of marvel to behold for size and for beauty. The stones used to build the surrounding stone wall was quarried from underneath the center island. One kind was white, another black, and a third red. Some of the buildings were simple, but in others they put together different stones, wearing the color to please the eye, and to be a natural source of the light. The entire circuits of the wall, which went round the outermost zone, they covered with a coating of brass. In the temple they placed statues of gold. There was the god himself standing in a chariot, the charioteer of 6 winged horses. The gods who came from the stars were often represented as beings in chariots with either winged horses, feathered snakes, dragons, or just the wings were attached to the chariot or to the gods themselves to represent the ability of flying coming from the outer space to the earth. This is how the idea of winged angels filtered into religions. Powerful beings that could take off and leave the planet. It is also mentioned that humanity has been given laws by Poseidon, which were engraved on the temple columns. The end of Atlantis was linked to the decline in following those laws over the centuries, and lowering the collective consciousness, disrespecting the life in harmony and peace. The Plato's writing ends abruptly where the ruler of all gods Zeus calls all gods to a building created in the center of the earth. The center of the world as we know today is marked by the Great Pyramid. Perhaps what is under the pyramid is still there. The Hall of Records that the Egyptian priests safeguarded for the time humanity is ready to know its true origin. Let me know what you think about the Egyptian priests, Atlantis and the gods in the comment. Subscribe if you are interested in the upcoming presentations. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe and share. It is a new channel, with many more documentaries to come soon on different subjects related to expanded awareness.